The sky over Jupiter's largest mining outpost glowed with the usual orange-red haze. Workers moved about their day, extracting valuable minerals that kept Earth's economy strong. No one noticed the small blip on the long-range sensors at first. Officer Sam Kelly was halfway through his shift at the monitoring station when the alert came in. He rubbed his tired eyes and looked again at the screen. Something was approaching the Jupiter outpost, and it wasn't one of theirs. "Captain Grant, you need to see this," Sam called over the comm. Captain William Grant arrived minutes later, his uniform slightly wrinkled from a too-short nap. The year 2157 had been busy for the United Earth Space Command, with new colonies being established across the solar system. "What have we got?" he asked, leaning over Sam's console. "Unknown vessel, sir. Doesn't match any known configuration in our database. It's big, really big." Grant's expression hardened. "Send the standard greeting package. All languages, all formats." Humanity had prepared for this moment for generations. First contact protocols were drilled into every UESC officer. Grant watched as Sam sent the carefully crafted message of peace. Hours passed. The vessel continued its approach. "Sir, they're responding," Sam said suddenly. The message that came through wasn't what anyone expected. It contained no words of greeting, no peaceful introduction. Instead, a harsh, clicking language filled the communication channel. "Running it through the translator now," said Communications Officer Judy Benson. Her fingers flew over the keyboard as she worked. The translation came through in fragments. Ardani. Violation. Territory. Punishment. "What's an Ardani?" Sam asked. No one had an answer. Grant opened a direct channel. "Unknown vessel, this is Captain William Grant of the United Earth Space Command. We are not these Ardani you speak of. We are humans from the planet Earth. We seek peaceful contact." The reply was immediate and untranslatable, a series of high-pitched sounds that made the speakers crackle. "They're powering up something," Sam reported, his voice rising. "Energy readings are off the charts." Grant hit the station-wide alarm. "All personnel. Emergency protocols. This is not a drill. Get to the evacuation pods now." On the main viewer, the alien ship changed. Parts of its hull shifted, revealing what could only be weapons. They glowed with a blue-green light that grew brighter by the second. "Send the emergency signal to Earth," Grant ordered. "Tell them we're under attack." Judy's hands shook as she sent the message. "Captain, they're broadcasting again." This time, the translation was clearer. "Your aggression will not be tolerated, Ardani vermin." "We are not Ardani," Grant shouted into the comm. "This is a mistake." The alien ship fired. The first blast hit the outpost's main power core. Alarms screamed throughout the station as systems failed. The second blast tore through the residential section, where 1,500 colonists lived. Grant watched in horror as the outpost began to break apart. "Everyone to escape pods. Now," he ordered. Sam grabbed the data cores, protecting the records of what was happening. Judy continued broadcasting their identity, hoping the aliens would understand their mistake. They never did. From the small escape pod, Grant, Sam, and Judy watched as the massive alien vessel methodically destroyed the Jupiter outpost. Piece by piece, the station was reduced to floating debris. Other escape pods launched, but not enough. Not nearly enough. "Why?" Judy whispered, tears floating from her eyes in the zero gravity. "We did nothing to them. They think we're someone else," Grant said, his voice hollow. "These are Ardani, whoever they are." Sam clutched the data core to his chest. Earth needs to know. They need to prepare. As their pod drifted away, the alien ship turned and moved with surprising speed out of the solar system. Its final message echoed through their comm system. "Let this be a warning to all Ardani. The Krell will not tolerate your expansion into our territory." Grant stared at the debris field that had once been home to 1,500 people. His hands clenched into fists. They just declared war on the wrong species, he said quietly. And they're going to regret it. The emergency council chamber buzzed with angry voices. 50 world leaders and military commanders gathered around the large oval table. Screens on the walls showed the destruction of the Jupiter outpost from every angle. The images came from the data core Sam Kelly had saved. Director Catherine Bell stood at the head of the table, her gray hair pulled back tightly, her face grim. She raised her hand, and the room fell silent. We lost 1,432 people at the Jupiter outpost, she said. We need answers, and we need a plan. Captain Grant stepped forward. 3 days had passed since his escape pod was picked up. He hadn't slept much. The aliens called themselves the Krell, he said. They believed we were someone called the Ardani. All our attempts to correct them failed. Science officer Alan Murphy tapped his tablet, and a new image appeared on the screens. It showed wave patterns. These are our standard greeting broadcasts, he said, pointing to the top lines. And these are what we know of Ardani communications, based on what we found in the Krell ship's databanks. The patterns looked similar enough that several people in the room gasped. They thought we were their enemies because our radio signals look alike, asked Bell. It appears so, said Murphy. A simple case of mistaken identity with terrible consequences. From his seat near the back, military advisor Frank Rogers stood up. His uniform was crisp, his voice hard. Simple or not, we've been attacked. We need to ready our defenses in case they return. Several voices agreed with him. Bell looked around the room. What are our options? Dr. Olivia Martinez raised her hand. She was head of the linguistics division. I can work on better translation algorithms. If they come back, we need to make them understand who we are. And if they don't care who we are? Rogers asked. If they attack anyway? Bell sighed. Then we need to be ready. How many ships can we put together? Admiral Joe Davis consulted his own tablet. The UESC has 27 warships that can be made combat-ready within 2 weeks. Not much against what we saw of their technology. It will have to do, Bell said. Begin preparations immediately. As the meeting broke up into smaller groups, Grant found himself standing with Rogers and Martinez. Do you really think they'll be back? Martinez asked. Rogers nodded. Count on it. They think we're these Ardani. There's probably a whole history there we know nothing about. Grant looked back at the screens, still showing the destruction of the outpost. We need to understand them better. Know why they hate the Ardani so much. I'll need everything you can remember about their language, Martinez said to him. Every sound, every pattern. Grant nodded. I'll help however I can. For the next 3 weeks, Earth prepared. Warships were upgraded. Colonies were fortified. Martinez and her team worked day and night on translation software. Grant recorded everything he could remember about the Krell ship, its weapons, its movements. Rogers oversaw the creation of new defensive systems based on what they had learned. We won't be caught unprepared again, he promised Bell during a progress meeting. But privately, many wondered if anything they could do would be enough against an enemy so advanced and already convinced of humanity's guilt. Then, on the 23rd day after the attack, the alarm sounded again. Lieutenant Peter Shaw was on patrol near Saturn when his sensors lit up. UESD Command, this is Scout Ship Horizon, he reported, voice steady despite his fear. I'm detecting multiple large vessels entering the solar system. Configuration matches the Krell ship from the Jupiter incident. In the command center on Earth, Bell received the news with a grim expression. How many? She asked. 15 ships, ma'am, came the reply. And they're heading straight for us. Bell looked at Rogers, then at Grant, who had been working with the defense team. It seems they've come back to finish what they started, she said. Alert all ships. This is not a drill. The Krell had returned, and this time they brought a fleet. Lieutenant Peter Shaw's hand stayed steady on the controls of his scout ship, even as fear knotted his stomach. He kept his distance from the Krull fleet, using Saturn's rings as cover. Through his view screen, he watched 15 massive ships move with purpose toward the inner solar system. "They're ignoring the outer colonies," he reported back to Earth, moving straight past Neptune Station and the Titan mining facilities. Back on Earth, Director Bell and her team analyzed the data coming in. The Krell fleet formation was unlike anything human military strategists had seen before. "They're moving in a spiral pattern," said Captain Lisa Wright, one of Earth's best tactical officers. She pointed to the display. "It's not efficient. Why would they approach like that?" Science Officer Murphy studied the pattern, then snapped his fingers. "Cross-reference this with what we have on Ardani tactics from the Krull databanks." The computer worked quickly. A new image appeared next to the first. The patterns were nearly identical. "They're following what they think is Ardani tactical doctrine," Murphy said. "They expect us to respond like Ardani would." Rogers leaned forward, eyes narrowed. "Then we don't. We do the opposite of whatever these Ardani would do." Captain Wright nodded slowly. "If we know how they expect us to act, we can surprise them." Director Bell gave her approval. "Make it happen. I want our ships deployed in patterns that would make no sense to someone expecting Ardani tactics." For the next 12 hours, Earth's defenses reorganized. The 27 warships split into unusual groupings. Some took positions that seemed to leave vital areas exposed. Others clustered where they would normally spread out. On the UESC flagship Defender, Admiral Carson watched the Krell fleet approach Mars orbit. "They're slowing down," he reported. "Our unusual formations are making them cautious." The largest Krell ship, nearly a mile long, moved to the front of their fleet. It broadcast a message in the same harsh, clicking language as before. This time, Dr. Martinez's new translation software worked better. "Ardani deception will not save you." The message said, "Your colonies in this system violate the Treaty of Vexicor. Surrender now or be destroyed." Bell authorized a response. "We are not Ardani. We are humans from Earth. There has been a mistake. We request peaceful communication." The Krell did not reply. Instead, 3 of their ships broke formation and accelerated toward Earth. The others spread out, targeting Mars colonies and the moon base. "They're not listening," Rogers said grimly. Admiral Carson gave the order. "All ships, execute Plan Wildcard." Earth's defenders responded with moves no traditional military would make. Ships that should have formed a defensive line instead charged directly at the Krell. Vessels that should have protected colonies abandoned their posts to attack from unexpected angles. On his ship, a Krell commander named Zex Toril watched in confusion as human ships approached using no formation he recognized. "The Ardani have changed their tactics," he told his crew. "Be alert." The first clash came near Mars. 5 human ships surrounded one Krell vessel. The Krell expected them to attack from a distance, using shields for protection as the Ardani always did. Instead, the human ships closed to point-blank range, sacrificing safety for devastating attack power. The Krell ship's shields had been configured to block long-range weapons. The close assault tore through them. For the first time in centuries of war with the Ardani, a Krell commander found himself truly surprised. Across the solar system, similar scenes played out. Human ships took heavy damage but delivered unexpected blows. The Krell, committed to fighting what they thought was a familiar enemy, struggled to adapt. Lieutenant Shaw, still watching from the outer system, couldn't believe what he was seeing. The powerful Krell fleet was being thrown into disarray by Earth's seemingly chaotic defense. "It's working," he whispered. "They don't know how to fight us because we're not fighting like they expected." But the battle had only just begun, and the Krell still outnumbered and outgunned Earth's forces. The real test was yet to come. The battle raged across the solar system. Earth ships took heavy damage, but fought with a ferocity that surprised the Krell. On the UESC Defender, Admiral Carson watched the tactical display with grim satisfaction. 3 Krell ships had already been disabled. "Their shields adapt quickly," reported his weapons officer. Each hit does less damage than the one before. In the engineering section of the ship, Nancy Miller heard this report. She had been working on the ship's weapon systems since the first attack. An idea struck her. "Sir," she called to Carson over the comm, "what if we change our weapon frequency with each volley? If their shields are adaptive, we need to keep them guessing." Carson didn't hesitate. "Do it. Send the modification to all ships." Nancy's fingers flew over her console as she adjusted the phase harmonics of the ship's main cannons. She transmitted the changes to the fleet. The next volley struck a Krell vessel with renewed effectiveness, its shields flickering under the assault. The Krell commander Zex Toril watched in growing concern as his fleet's advantage began to slip away. These creatures fought like no Ardeni he had ever encountered. He opened a channel to all ships. Change to attack pattern Vex Core. Target their homeworld directly. 7 Krell ships broke free from the fighting and formed a wedge, diving toward Earth. Admiral Carson saw the danger. "They're going for Earth. All available ships, intercept." But most of Earth's fleet was engaged elsewhere. Only 3 ships could respond in time, including the Defender. They placed themselves between Earth and the approaching Krell. On the planet below, Director Bell watched the battle unfold. "Activate the orbital defense grid," she ordered. "Everything we've got." Earth's surface-to-space weapons powered up. They had been hastily constructed over the past 3 weeks and never tested in combat. Bell held her breath as the Krell ships came into range. The orbital defenses fired. Beams of energy lanced upward from dozens of locations around the planet. 2 Krell ships veered off, shields damaged. The remaining 5 pressed forward. Admiral Carson's voice came over the command center speakers. "We can't stop them all. Brace for impact." The Krell ships launched their weapons. Massive energy projectiles streaked toward Earth's surface. The orbital defenses shot down some, but others got through. They struck in Brazil, Argentina, and the southern Atlantic. The command center shook with the impacts. Reports of damage flooded in. Millions of people were in the affected areas. "We need to end this now," Bell said. She turned to Rogers. "Do we have anything else?" The military advisor nodded grimly. "The prototype. It's not tested, but—" "Use it," she ordered. In orbit, the Defender received new orders. Carson read them and looked at his weapons officer. "Target the lead Krell ship with the gravity pulse weapon." The officer's eyes widened. "Sir, that's experimental. It could affect our ships too. We're out of options." "Do it." The Defender's main cannon began to glow with an eerie purple light. The energy buildup caused the ship's lights to dim. When it fired, the beam seemed to bend space itself as it traveled. It struck the lead Krell ship dead center. Instead of an explosion, the ship seemed to crumple in on itself as the artificial gravity field intensified 1,000-fold. Secondary effects rippled outward, catching 2 more Krell vessels in its wake. In the confusion, pilot Jack Harris saw an opportunity. His small fighter had been disabled early in the battle, drifting among debris. Now he found himself remarkably close to a damaged Krell scout ship. "Command, this is Harris. I have a chance to board one of their vessels. Permission to attempt capture." The response came quickly. "Permission granted. But be careful, Harris." Jack maneuvered his damaged fighter to the Krell ship's airlock. With only his sidearm and his wits, he prepared to become the first human to board an alien vessel. Meanwhile, the remaining Krell ships began to pull back. They had lost 7 vessels, an unprecedented defeat. Zex Toril gave the retreat order, but not before launching a final bombardment at Earth's southern hemisphere. As the Krell fleet disappeared into deep space, humanity had survived its first interstellar battle. But the cost had been terrible, and the war had only just begun. The captured Krell scout ship sat in a heavily guarded hangar at the lunar base. Teams of scientists worked around the clock to understand its technology. Pilot Jack Harris had managed to secure the vessel with surprisingly few problems. Its 4-person crew had been killed during the battle before he boarded. Scientists Diane Cooper and Ryan Price led the research team. They had been studying the ship for 2 weeks now. Diane ran her hand along the strange metal of the hull. "Their material science is at least a century ahead of ours," she said to Ryan. "But their computer systems are odd. Almost biological." Ryan nodded as he worked to access the ship's data systems. "It's like they think differently than we do. Their navigation uses patterns I can't even recognize." In another section of the ship, communications specialist Henry Ward worked to decode more of the Krell language. The translation software Dr. Martinez had created helped, but there was still much to learn. "I think I found something," he called out. The other scientists gathered around his workstation. "It's a historical database. Look at these images." The screen showed recordings of what appeared to be a long-running war. The Krell fought against humanoid aliens with pale blue skin and 4 arms. "The Ardani," whispered Diane. "That's who they thought we were." "The war has been going on for over 100 years, Henry said as he scrolled through the data. According to this, the Ardani once almost wiped out the Krell using biological weapons designed specifically for their physiology. Ryan frowned. No wonder they attacked first and asked questions later. They thought we were their genocidal enemies. The scientists compiled their findings and presented them to Director Bell and the United Earth Council. The room was silent as they showed footage of battles between the Krell and Ardani. "The Ardani fight using very rigid mathematical formations," explained Ryan. "That's why our chaotic tactics confused the Krell so much. The Ardani would never sacrifice ships the way we did." Bell looked troubled. "So we accidentally stumbled into a century-long war between 2 advanced alien civilizations, and one of them thinks we're the other. We need to make them understand we're not Ardani," said Henry. "I believe I've decoded enough of their language to formulate a clear message now." Rogers frowned. They didn't listen before. Why would they listen now? "Because now we have proof," Diane said. "Biological samples showing we're not Ardani. Cultural data. We can show them we're a different species entirely." Bell considered this. "We need to send a diplomatic mission. Someone to deliver this message directly to Krell leadership." The room grew quiet. Everyone knew what she was suggesting. A mission to Krell space would be incredibly dangerous. "I'll go," said a voice from the doorway. Captain Susan Baker stood there. She had commanded one of the few ships to survive the battle without major damage. "My ship, the UESC Emissary, is fast and relatively undamaged." Bell nodded slowly. "This will be strictly volunteer. The risk is extreme." "I understand," Baker replied. "But if we don't try to communicate, this war will continue until one side is destroyed. And I'm not sure it would be them." Over the next week, the emissary was modified for the journey. Its weapon systems were reduced to make room for more diplomatic and scientific equipment. A team of 35 volunteers was assembled, including Henry Ward and Ryan Price. Before they departed, Director Bell met with Captain Baker one last time. "This mission may be our only chance to avoid a full-scale war," Bell said. "If you can make them understand we're not Ardani." "We'll do everything possible," Baker promised. "The evidence is clear. We just need them to look at it." The emissary launched without ceremony. Its journey would take 2 months to reach the edge of Krell space. As Earth grew small behind them, the crew knew they carried the hopes of humanity with them. They were heading into the territory of an enemy who had already tried to destroy them twice. Their mission: to convince that enemy they had made a terrible mistake. The UESD emissary traveled through the darkness of deep space for 2 months. Captain Susan Baker spent most days studying the Krell language with Henry Ward. They needed to be ready to speak clearly when they reached Krell territory. "Their language has no word for individual thinking," Henry explained during one session. "Everything is about the group, the hive." Susan frowned. "That might explain why they find us so confusing. We act as individuals, not always as a coordinated unit." On the observation deck, Science Officer Daniel Green kept detailed records of the stars they passed. As they entered what they believed to be Krell space, he called the captain to his station. "You need to see this," he said, pointing to the view screen. Susan looked and felt her heart sink. They were passing a destroyed solar system. Planets had been reduced to asteroid fields. There were signs of massive weapons use everywhere. "The Krell-Ardani War," she whispered. "We're seeing the aftermath." Daniel nodded grimly. "And based on these readings, this destruction happened recently. Maybe just a few years ago." The emissary continued deeper into Krell territory. The crew grew more tense with each passing day. They had no idea if they would be fired upon the moment they were detected. On day 63 of their journey, the sensors lit up with multiple contacts. "Captain, we have 5 large vessels approaching," reported the sensor officer. "Configuration matches Krell warships." Susan took a deep breath. "This is the moment we've been preparing for. Open a channel using their frequencies." Communications Officer Linda Martinez activated the system they had designed based on the captured Krell technology. "Channel open, Captain." Susan spoke clearly, using the Krell language as best she could. "Attention Krell vessels. We are humans from Earth. We are not Ardani. We come in peace to correct a misunderstanding." For long moments, there was no response. The Krell ships continued to approach. "Should we raise shields?" asked her first officer. Susan shook her head. "No, we need to show them we're not a threat. That's not why we're here." Finally, a response came through. The harsh clicking sounds translated through their system. "Human vessel, you have entered restricted space. Prepare to be boarded." Susan looked at her crew. "This is what we came for. A chance to talk. Let them board." The largest Krell ship moved alongside the emissary. The humans felt their ship shudder as the Krell attached a docking tube. Henry Ward studied the translation carefully. "Captain, they didn't shoot us on sight. That has to be a good sign." Ryan Price nodded in agreement. "They're curious. They want to understand what we are." 6 Krell soldiers entered the emissary through the airlock. The humans got their first good look at the aliens they had been fighting. The Krell stood 7 feet tall with gray-green exoskeletons. They had 4 arms and large, compound eyes that took in everything at once. They carried weapons but kept them lowered. Their leader stepped forward. The translation device identified him as Commander Zex Kaltar. "You claim to be not Ardani," he said, his words processed through the translator. "Yet you come in an armed vessel." Susan stepped forward. "We were forced to defend ourselves when you attacked our outpost. We have come to show you that humans and Ardani are different species." She nodded to Ryan, who carefully activated the main screen. It showed DNA comparisons between humans and what they had found in the Krell database about Ardani biology. "See for yourselves," Susan said. "Different number of chromosomes, different cellular structure. We are not your enemy." The Krell soldiers looked at each other. Their communications seemed to happen partly through subtle movements of their antennae. Finally, Zex Kaltar spoke again. "You will come with us to the outpost station. Our scientists will confirm your claims." Susan nodded. "That's why we're here." The emissary was escorted by the Krell ships to a massive space station orbiting a gas giant. As they approached, Susan and her crew realized something important. The Krell weren't simply a militaristic species. They were fighting for survival in a war that had nearly destroyed them, and humans had accidentally stumbled into the middle of it. The diplomatic mission had succeeded in its first goal. They would be heard. But convincing the Krell they weren't a threat might prove even harder than they imagined. The Krell space station was enormous, easily 10 times the size of anything humans had built. Captain Susan Baker and her team were led through curved hallways lined with a strange organic material that seemed almost alive. Krell moved in organized groups, their movements perfectly coordinated. After 3 days of tests and questions, the humans were finally brought before the Krell High Command. 5 senior Krell sat on raised platforms. Their exoskeletons had a deeper green color than the others, marked with intricate patterns. "We have reviewed your evidence," said the Center Krell, identified as Supreme Commander Vex Toral. The translation came through clearly. "Our scientists confirm you are biologically distinct from the Ardani." Susan felt a wave of relief wash over her. "Then you understand there has been a terrible mistake." "A mistake, yes," said Vex Toral. "But your species' actions remain disturbing. You fought in ways no logical species would fight. You sacrificed ships in patterns that make no strategic sense. This suggests dangerous unpredictability." Ryan Price stepped forward. "What you call unpredictability, we call adaptability. Humans think as individuals, not just as a group. It gives us different perspectives." The Krell commander's antennae twitched in what seemed like discomfort. Susan realized that the very concept of individual thought patterns bothered them. "Your biology confirms you are not Ardani," said another commander. "But your behavior may still make you dangerous, perhaps more dangerous." Before Susan could respond, a Krell officer rushed into the chamber. He spoke rapidly to the high command in their own language, too quick for the translators to catch. The commander's postures changed immediately. Vex Toral turned to the humans. "The Ardani have launched a major offensive. While we diverted forces to your solar system, they have penetrated deep into our territory." Screens activated around the chamber, showing battle scenes. The Ardani ships moved in perfect geometric formations, exactly as the records had shown. "But there were hundreds of them now." "They are 3 days from our homeworld," said Vex Toral. "Our defenses are compromised." Susan looked at her team, then back at the Krell commanders. "Let us help you." The room went silent. Even the translator seemed to hesitate. "Help us? Why would you help those who attack your world?" asked Vex Toral. "Because it was a mistake," Susan said. "And because if the Ardani destroy you, they'll eventually find Earth. We have a common enemy now." The Krell commanders conferred among themselves, their antennae moving in complex patterns. Finally, Vex Toral spoke again. "What could your single ship do against an Ardani fleet?" Susan smiled slightly. "It's not about our ship. It's about our ideas. The Ardani expect you to fight as you always have. They've fought you for a century. They know all your tactics." Ryan nodded eagerly. "But they've never fought humans. They don't know how we think, how we adapt." "Your unpredictability," said Vex Toral thoughtfully. "Exactly," Susan said. "The same thing that confused you when we fought will confuse them. But this time, it can work in your favor." The Krell commanders talked among themselves again. The fate of both species hung in the balance. "Very well," Vex Toral finally said. "We will form a joint task force. Your Captain Baker will advise war leader Vex Morath on human tactical approaches." A tall Krell stepped forward from the side of the room. Vex Morath's exoskeleton bore the marks of many battles. "I do not understand how creatures who think as individuals can function in battle," he said, "but I am willing to learn if it will save my people." Susan extended her hand, a human gesture of agreement. After a moment's hesitation, Vex Morath extended one of his 4 hands to meet hers. An unlikely alliance was formed. Humans, who had been attacked by mistake, were now partnering with their attackers to face a common enemy. The real war was about to begin, and the future of both species would depend on their ability to work together. As they left the chamber to begin planning, Ryan whispered to Susan, "Do you think this can actually work?" Susan watched the Krell moving in their perfect formation. "It has to. Because if we can't beat the Ardani together, neither of us will survive alone." The Krell fleet gathered near their homeworld, a blue-green planet with 3 moons. 200 ships formed a defensive line in perfect geometric patterns. For a century, they had fought the Ardani this way. But today would be different. Captain Susan Baker stood on the bridge of the Krell flagship beside war leader Vex Morath. For 2 days, she had shared human battle tactics with the Krell commanders. At first, they had struggled to understand. "Chaos is not a strategy," one commander had argued. "It's not chaos," Susan had explained. It's flexibility, unpredictability. The Ardani expect you to follow rules, so we break them. Now they would see if the plan would work. The Krell ships had been divided into 5 groups, each with different instructions. Some would behave as the Ardani expected. Others would do the opposite. Ardani fleet detected, reported a Krell officer. 300 vessels approaching from Sector 7. Vex Morath looked at Susan. They outnumber us. Are you certain this will work? Susan nodded. The Ardani have fought you for 100 years. They think they know exactly what you'll do. That's their weakness. The Ardani ships came into view on the main screen. They were sleek and pale blue, arranged in perfect diamond formations. Their movements were mathematically precise. They're beautiful, in a way, Susan said quietly. And deadly, added Vex Morath. They have nearly wiped us out 3 times in the past century. The Krell commander raised his arm. All ships prepare to engage. Follow the human plan. As the Ardani fleet approached, they sent a message. Krell forces, surrender your homeworld as required by War Protocol Section 9. Your defeat is mathematically certain. Susan shook her head. They really do think in rules and formulas. That is why they have nearly defeated us, said Vex Morath. Their logic is perfect. Until today. The Ardani fleet moved into attack position, exactly as predicted. They split into 3 precise groups, each targeting a section of the Krell defense line. But when they fired their first weapons, the Krell ships did not respond as expected. Instead of holding formation, 60 Krell ships broke away in seemingly random directions. Others charged directly at the Ardani, ignoring all conventional tactics. Some pretended to retreat, then circled back when pursued. On the Lid Ardani ship, Admiral Zinfar watched in confusion. The Krell are not following standard defense protocols, he said to his officers. Analyze their new patterns. But there were no patterns to analyze. Each Krell group acted differently, some changing tactics mid-battle. The Ardani ships, so used to fighting an enemy they understood, found themselves surrounded and outmaneuvered. On the Krell flagship, engineer Paul Edwards worked with Krell technicians to modify their weapon systems. If we alternate frequencies like this, he explained, their shields won't have time to adapt. The modified weapons struck the Ardani ships with devastating effect. Their perfect formations began to break apart as they tried to respond to threats coming from unexpected directions. It's working, Susan said as she watched the tactical display. The Ardani fleet was losing its cohesion. Vex Morath nodded. They cannot comprehend what we are doing. They have no formula for this. After 6 hours of battle, the Ardani fleet began to withdraw. They had lost 70 ships and damaged many more. The Krell had lost only 28. They are retreating, announced a Krell officer. The bridge crew made a sound Susan had never heard before, a clicking that her translator identified as celebration. In the days that followed, the Krell High Command met with the human delegation. A formal treaty was signed. The Krell-Human Mutual Defense Pact. The Krell agreed to recognize Earth's sovereignty and to share technology. Humans would help them develop new strategies against the Ardani. As the ceremony concluded, Supreme Commander Vex Toril approached Susan. When we first encountered your species, we made a grave error, he said. Congratulations, we declared war on the incorrect species. Susan smiled. It was a mistake that could have destroyed both of us. Vex Toril's antennae moved in what Susan now recognized as agreement. Instead, it may have saved us both. Your unpredictability, which we first feared, has become our greatest weapon. As the human delegation prepared to return to Earth, they knew this was just the beginning. The Ardani would return, and next time they would be prepared for human tactics. But now, humans and Krell would face them together. 2 vastly different species, united by a simple mistake and an unexpected victory.